That's a problem about the structure of the industry, and there is no constitutional problem with regulating the structure of the industry. We won't have any choices about what is true and what's not true if there are no choices about what's presented and what's not.
The only thing AOC and Ted Cruz agree on, everyone seems to agree to repeal Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, the legislation regulating the tech industry. You know, the one that lets Twitter and Facebook off the hook for whatever they publish. They're not responsible for your racist uncle. They can't be sued if they publish lies. Joe Biden says he wants to repeal it. So did Donald Trump. The Democrats want to change it because they want to stop hate speech and misinformation. Republicans hate it because they want to apply to social media sites the First Amendment, even if they're private companies that can take down whatever content they want. So AOC and Ted Cruz agree, but they totally disagree. Stay tuned. Martha, you've written a lot about this. Do they agree or do they disagree? And what's the problem with Section 230?
Well, Section 230, of course, was an effort to create an immunity compared with the common law and statutory rules that otherwise apply to broadcast and cable and print media. What are those otherwise existing rules? Well, those otherwise existing rules that have been around for hundreds of years, certainly since the formation of this country, actually allow individuals and groups to sue for intentional or highly negligent publication of false material. They also allow for civil action, government regulation with regard to fraud, with regard to misleading consumers. Those rules that do apply to every other media are not applied to those that are identified as social media that are communicated by the internet, because when Section 230 was created, it was at the early days of the internet, and fledgling institutions that encourage people to invest and create brand new companies. Well, fast forward to today. Those brand new companies now are the biggest, have the largest market capitalization, the largest user base of any companies almost in the world, and they don't need the government subsidy anymore. I think that you asked the good question, is there an agreement to be had in the Congress? Maybe not, but the fact that there is uniform dislike of the current arrangement suggests that there is a possible deal on the table, maybe one that is, as I say, not an elimination of the immunity, but an amendment that all parties could agree to produce more responsible action. I think that we should treat the internet companies as adult companies, like other adult companies that have consumer protection duties, that have obligations to be truthful, that have obligations to file reports. And if they're not, then let's have competition.
One question that I always get asked is, the whole, for example, like the Tucker Carlson case, where his defense was, no one should believe me. This is entertainment. I lie all the time. So why should I? So. And that's been a protection of a bunch of different of these commentators. How is that something that they can do that and make that defense, but remain with the news title? Or how is that not something that you can actually prosecute for?
Again, I think here the problem is more lack of competition. We have many parts of the country where Fox News is the only so-called news source that's available. That's a problem about the structure of the industry, and there is no constitutional problem with regulating the structure of the industry. Again, I don't think the government should be in the business of defining who is news and who is not. That is a technique of the Soviet government or even the current Russian government. Having independence from the government on those matters, I think, is very, very important. But we won't have any choices about what is true and what's not true if there are no choices about what's presented and what's not. The fact of the matter is Fox News has created a business model that's predicated on fomenting hatred and misrepresentation. That's just a fact. and we need to have more competition. But I'm not sure that MSNBC is always that much better. And we need, more commentators, more criticism. And it's interesting to me how many people actually would rather just get the details of what happened recently rather than all of this angry stuff. And I think a lot of people would like, if not the fairness doctrine, something that one of my students calls the awareness doctrine. Let's just have more disclosure about who's picking and what are the points of view that are not being presented, and what is a competing message that's being offered somewhere else.
So is it illegal to knowingly spread misinformation? That's illegal?
Such a good question. The Supreme Court of the United States has actually said that lies can themselves obtain protection under the Constitution. At the same time, the Supreme Court has upheld laws that punish false information that harms consumers. So we're in a kind of Netherland. We don't exactly know what the line is here. But again, trusting the government to tell us what's true and what's not is exactly an anathema under our Constitution. What's required is to create a healthy ecosystem with enough variety and viewpoints that people can call out someone, including Tucker Carlson, and say, hey, what you just said is just not true.
How do you create policies that sounds like it's like more pushing for transparency or transparency of moderation? How do you foment more competition amongst the moderators? How do you also create more competition amongst the media companies? What would you prescribe?
So there is no silver bullet here. We got to this point because we have a very complicated situation with a lot of moving parts, but there are several steps that would really help. One is to actually require payments to those who are producing content. Take the legacy media companies that have their content constantly ripped off and presented in social media. And, Australia and the European Union have done this and have required the social media companies to actually pay copyright. Surprise, surprise. Which would allow for the professionals to continue to do their work. A related concept is public utility regulation. If it's come to the point that having social media is like having electricity, you can't really function in society without it, then it's a public utility. And that justifies regulation, even if it's a private industry and they're private profits. And the kinds of regulations are not about content, they're about service and, again, disclosure, as you said. I do think that giving publishers tools to balance the media marketplace without government censorship can be offered by something like the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, which is a proposal to have a narrow, safe harbor from antitrust liability if the news organizations get together and collectively organize and negotiate with the big tech companies for fair compensation for the use of their content. Another collection of ideas would be to support or amplify a variety of sources. One way would be to tax the internet companies and use the revenues to support public alternatives, to fund civic-oriented journalism, have funds for private investigative journalism. I am a fan of public media. I think that we could afford to give much more funding to public television, public radio, and even tiny rules, like adjust the rules requiring the underwriting practices so that private groups can more freely give their support to public media, and revise the Copyright Act's treatment of public media so that they can be protected in the new distribution platforms. How about amplifying the tax exemptions for philanthropic aid so that you and I, if we make a donation to a media source, that we can get a tax deduction? If there's
you can't get that right now?
Not if it's a for-profit.
Yeah.
It has to be a 501c3. And, I think there could be even an amplified tax deduction for those kinds of donations to philanthropic entities. Take ProPublica or other media watchdogs. And as we've mentioned, the Local News Sustainability Act, there's some even versions of this that are pending in some state legislatures. They would allow news publishers to actually gain some funding by making sure that there are tax deductions for those who make private donations, but also for those who take out ads in the local news, and also exempt them from payroll taxes for hiring new reporters. There are lots of tools that would all help.
Is this something that's totally divided, like a lot of things in the country? Are there any things that actually could get passed, or could just be something that all politicians want?
The Local News Sustainability Act has bipartisan support. It is endorsed by Mitch McConnell. It is endorsed by Democrats. And I think there's a good reason for this. Politicians know more than anybody that if you don't have reliable news sources, they can't do their job. They can't get reelected. And interestingly, public broadcasting also has bipartisan support. NPR has bipartisan support. In many parts of the country, it's the only news source. So yes, these are actual solutions that could secure even more support.